What's a rich people thing that rich people don't know is a rich people thing? Story 1. If you grow up rich, it's pretty much everything. Essentially, it's atmosphere. My aunt's family was very well off. Her husband had a blue-collar background. The first time he saw her was the summer after his junior year of college, when he was part of a crew doing lawn work at her parents' house. They dated very briefly, but they had nothing in common. He busted his ass, got a few lucky breaks, and ended up with a very, very lucrative job. A few solid investments later, he was actually worth more than my aunt's whole family. 8 years later, he asked her out again. To hear him tell it, he took her to a really swanky restaurant with a long wait list that he managed to bypass thanks to a friend who knew the owner. As soon as they sat down, he said to her, "I always wanted to take you to a place like this." My aunt looked around the room, she looked at him, and she said, "A place like what?" To her, it was just a restaurant. Story 2. A friend of mine is a trust fund baby. She decided she wanted to hike the AT, so she quit her very comfy job, bought all the gear, and flew to Virginia. She only made it a few weeks and got bored. Came back home and her dad found her another very comfy job. Hasn't been hiking since. I was floored by this. Another friend decided she wanted to be a dairy farmer, so she bought a farm in Kansas and got some cows. Then she had to hire a farm hand after 2 cows died because she didn't know they needed minerals. They just act so flippantly without care or thought. Story 3. I have one that nobody ever thinks about, but friendships. When you move in wealthy circles, maintaining a circle of friendships is much easier. They have the time, energy, and money to prioritize trips away together. They can meet their girlfriends for dinners because they have access to childcare and don't have to be up at 5 a.m. 7 days a week. They can outsource their admin. They don't have to be calling the electrician or spending the day taking their car to a mechanic. They have access to a high level of medical care, so may spend less time chasing medical issues around. They have the freedom to pursue these friendships. When you're working class, you and all your friends are working their asses off just surviving and keeping on top of their responsibilities. We're all busy and exhausted, so maintaining friendships takes a lot of work and sacrifice. It's why we always see wealthy people with like 40 close friends, and we have like 2 close friends we struggle to make time to see. Story 4. Parents who know how to do things, who help you fill out college applications, who guide you into lessons, the right classes, how to rent an apartment, invest, etc., etc. Upper middle class kids have no idea how many things working class kids have to figure out for themselves because their parents have no experience in that stuff, like the parents don't even know what it is that they don't know. Story 5. Buying things that last. Rich people can afford much higher quality products. Think furniture, clothing, accessories. Hell, I'm sitting on a probably 30-year-old couch that we inherited from my in-laws, who I would describe as on the high end of middle class. But this stuff also gets spread around. When you move into your own place, your dad's old friend might have a dresser for you, or an old TV that still works, or what have you. And over time, the smart rich people spend less money than the poor. They can afford the upfront investment in higher quality products that last, while also enjoying the better quality of the products over their lifespan. And yes, for those in the know, I am reframing the Samuel Vimes boots theory, but it works here. Story 6. I dated a guy whose folks were really rich. At one point, we were all riding around on his dad's speedboat on the lake where they had their million-something second home. We passed a big house that was somewhat bigger than the big house his dad and stepmom owned. His stepmom sighed softly and said, "I wonder how the other half lives. It must be nice." Story 7. Vacations. I grew up in a family that was very financially comfortable. I was used to going on multiple trips a year, including a handful of international trips before I even graduated from high school. I lived a somewhat sheltered life surrounded mostly by friends of families in similar positions, so I thought it was normal. I mean, I remember trips to country club resorts, all-inclusives, multiple trips to Disney World, 2 trips to Mexico for high school graduations. We were constantly traveling throughout the year. Now I'm an adult who makes a very average salary, $60,000, and I never feel like traveling because my money is either tied up in something else or I feel the need to save just in case. My family went on a trip to Colorado this past spring, and it was so expensive. We had to buy appropriate winter wear because my husband and I didn't own any, including good snow boots, coats, and pants, airfare, food. We couldn't afford to ski because a single day pass was $200, excluding what it would cost to rent equipment. We walked around a cute little downtown hoping to find a nice memento to memorialize the trip and ended up only getting a single magnet for our fridge. Sometimes I get a little bummed that I've probably already gone on some of the coolest trips of my life as an early 30-something, but that's okay. Traveling is a privilege, and when we have the resources to do it again, it will feel more special because it will be special. Story 8. You want the honest truth? Speaking from someone who works daily with clients who have more money than they'll ever be able to spend in a lifetime, everything, literally everything they deal with, they don't realize us normal folk cannot afford. A recent client wanted me to hop on a plane and fly down to talk about a project. Just, hey, can you fly down this afternoon? I need to go over these design decisions. No, I cannot. And that's scratching the surface. Going out to dinner with these people ends in me losing a week's pay because they insist on going to the most expensive fucking place possible. I'm not saying we need to stop at McDonald's, but when my 8 ounces piece of steak costs $100 plus, there's a problem. And then, of course, there's the total and complete lack of realization that the world does not revolve around them. What do you mean is ahead of mine? I just approved it for production. Yes, but they approved theirs 2 weeks ago. So, just push mine ahead. And of course, the activities. Hey, let's go play golf/tennis/cricket this Friday. Can't I work? So, just take the day off. What's one day? The difference between me eating next week or not. Story 9. Having time. Poor people spend more time on survival stuff. Take traveling. A poorer person may have to rely on public transportation, coach seats in an airplane, buses, or Amtrak. A wealthy person may have a private jet they have access to. A poor person has to go to the grocery store, shop, cook, clean, etc. A wealthy person may have someone who does all that and cooks for them. So rich people have more time live exactly as they want without worrying about survival kind of stuff, period. Story 10. Having a gardener and/or housekeeper. Owning a vacation house, chalet, cottage. Man, I wish I could own a house. Always getting your coffee as takeout. Going out to lunch at an actual restaurant every day. Getting a service to come pick up and do your laundry and then drop it off later. And this last one I get from a lot of younger folk who have no concept that their family is well off and they are reaping the benefits, always traveling. Usually these are kids in their 20s, but I know a couple who I see Facebook updates constantly where they are always in a different country. These are the people who are gone months at a time and then maybe come back home during the holidays and just stay with their parents and then leave again. They don't have a house or apartment of their own that they would need to worry about continuing to pay for, so they can just be a nomad. Story 11. Not questioning the price of things. Like they don't ever wonder if it's worth the price or if they can afford to buy something. They just buy it. Not huge things like cars, but everyday stuff. Oh, we don't have an ice maker? Just bought one. Our vacuum cleaner isn't working right. Immediately buy a new one. I'm doing okay financially now, but still have to pause and think if we can afford to pick up certain items or have to wait a paycheck or two to do so. Some folks have zero concerns with money, and it shows when they also tell you that they have X item, and it's so wonderful and you have to buy one. Yeah, I'm not buying that, LOL. Story 12. Believing that they are closer to the average citizen than they actually are. Many rich people actually lack the fantasy on the reality of many average citizens and believe that not being able to use Apply Pay to pay for their latte in a coffee place in Hawaii must be the pinnacle of burden that possibly can be placed on a human being. Believing that being rich entitles you to be seen by others as a great human being when donating money for a good cause, rather than as the capitalist who you actually are. Believing that being rich entitles you to make a big fuzz of the absolute amount of money you pay in taxes, completely ignoring that in relative terms you may be paying way less due to tax optimizations than poor people do. Story 13. Not shopping around, especially for big things like home renos. My in-laws are like this. They are quite well off, and whenever they need something, they just go out and buy it without a second thought. They recently had epoxy poured in their garage by the first company they called spent close top 10K when we had our basement poured by a smaller company for just under 2K. Not to discount, there may be advantages to going with a bigger company with a warranty or something, but to not even call around to other companies before dropping thousand shocks. Me. Story 14. I'm not rich, but I do work around some rich people, and one thing I haven't seen mentioned is how practical it is to have staff around you to handle things for them. Something breaks around the house and you just tell the guy in charge of maintenance and he will deal everything with contractors, the work and billing. No hassle for you with either small or big stuff. The same with taxes, large purchases, vacations, plane tickets, etc. When you are rich, you can buy almost anything you want. And in one way, you can buy time also by having someone else take care of the details that us normies spend quite a bit of time on. It's often overlooked, but imagine never having to deal with the things and how much time that would free up. Story 15. From what I've seen, the main thing is just getting what you want, when you want it, without being concerned about the cost. Lots of rich people are so used to throwing money at their problems that they get confused when someone else can't do that. Car broke down? Rent one until it's fixed, or buy a new one. House needs to be fumigated? Get a hotel room for a week, phone dropped in the lake, buy a new one, flight canceled, book another airline. They're so used to that and just dropping their Amex on it that it doesn't occur to them that some people don't have the funds to get an easy resolution. Story 16. Living wherever they want. I needed a change of scenery, so I moved to Europe. I want to live in LA, so I'm going to pack up my family and go for it. No need to consider job implications, school zones, the logistics and costs of the actual moving, selling a house, traveling to find your new home, paying for movers or renting U-Haul trucks to do it yourself. Not to mention the potential cost of deciding you don't like your new city, country, and wanting to move again. Story 17. Based on what I've seen all my life, they think everybody always has the option of asking their parents to fix any given problem or eventuality. Need more money due to unforeseen expenses? Need a contact to help on some specific issue? Ask away and you shall receive. I was a broke-ass college student with a scholarship in a really expensive and prestigious private university, and I had a lot of wealthy friends who were really nice and never acted like assholes about their money. But it was pretty common that if I ran into some problem, a lot of them would, in trying to be helpful, suggest I call my parents or ask why I didn't call my parents, not realizing that my lower middle-class parents couldn't always fix things for me, especially if it involved simply throwing money at the problem. My parents always invested as much as they could in our education, so I went to private school all my life and I saw the exact same thing in elementary, middle school, and high school. You want the newest, most awesome backpack, a class trip, the SNES, and 24 cartridges? Mom and Dad got you covered. For example, I remember lending a Sega Genesis game to a friend in middle school, and when I asked for it back a few weeks later, he told me his mom had thrown his consoles and all the cartridges away, note consoles and games in plural, because his report card had come in and his grades sucked. So he apologized and bought me a new game to pay me back for the one his mom had thrown in the trash, but only after he saw I was really sad about it. Thing is, his initial reaction was thinking it was no big deal because to him it was the equivalent of my mom throwing away a comic book that cost less than $1. The thought that I had saved for that game for a long time never even crossed his mind as a possibility until I told him about it, and my mom would have never in a million years thrown away a game that cost $40, even if she thought it was to blame for my shitty grades, much less several $100s worth of games and consoles. As we got older, this just turned into networking instead of asking mom and dad for help, but still often involves their parents and their contacts and or their money, and they're currently turning into the parents that solve everything for their kids, especially by just throwing money at the problem. Story 18. For my purposes, I'm going to define rich as starting in the upper middle class. Your average lawyer is rich by middle-aged by this standard, and as I work with lawyers and have for a while now, they offer some interesting ways to illustrate things. For one, the notion that someone doesn't have savings will, they frequently suppose, be a choice at best, if not an actual moral failing. The notion that a person might literally not have anything to set aside once the non-negotiable costs are tallied does not compute. A rich person, as I've defined them, might not be saving themselves, but they could after all, and they know it. Another is that a rich person probably does not know how much money they have with any degree of precision. They might think they have about X thousand in the investment account, Y 10,000 in the retirement account, some vague thousands in checking, and frequently some equally vague but larger amount in checking. In all of these, there is significant lack in precision. A poor person, both by virtue of having fewer places where money might be an absolute need, almost certainly knows how much money they have, often down to the penny. A rich person can shop for groceries without really considering the cost of this versus that. The deciding factor on what goes into the cart is almost always something other than money. They prefer that brand of chips, beef presented in this particular way, and won't so much as blink at the fact that many types of produce can vary in price multiple times over depending on seasonal availability. Similarly, they can choose where they want to go eat without having to calculate whether it is possible. And from this same wellspring, all forms of spontaneity. The more money you have, the less you need to plan, well, everything. You can take all of this and package it together into a single idea that underlines why no poor person ever believes anyone with money when they say money can't buy happiness, and that is that, if you are poor, much of what you have to give to the world as a person is dedicated to planning and managing a resource that is finite and frequently entirely absent. Stated differently, the thing rich people do that they don't know about is that they are not stressed about the basic tasks of living life to the point where they frequently have very little left for anything else. Story 19. Consistency. When you never have to worry about variable costs for essential things, and even unexpected expenses are easily absorbed, there's nothing except emotional stress to derail your life. Predictability is so often overlooked because it's not considered something that can be purchased. People who can afford to automate their entire lives often don't have any idea how crushing the burden of manually managing everything can be. Even people who have experienced it are quick to forget once they get to a place where they don't have to anymore. It's all part of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps cognitive dissonance. Story 20. I am by no means rich, but through a decent salary and lots of overtime, I have a decent amount of cash set aside and usually a small surplus every month. A few years ago, one of my friends asked me how much a pint of milk was, and I genuinely had no idea. I couldn't tell them the price of anything at the supermarket. If I needed, for instance, milk, I'd just buy it. I'm 10x better now and like to shop around for deals. But that's always struck me as something that genuinely wealthy people would lack the knowledge of, as there's not much reason to check prices.